I live in Western Oregon, southwestern Oregon, and Oregon is a pretty tightly regulated state, right? I mean, Oregon has a bit of a reputation for being progressive. And what that often means is that the government puts its nose into your business a lot. Now, maybe you are thinking about adding on or remodeling or building something, and you're asking yourself, should I get a building permit? Is it worth it? Do the pluses outweigh the minuses? And how will I even find out if I need to get a building permit for the project that I have in mind? Let's talk about that. Now, the first thing that I want to point out is that it is different everywhere. Maybe you are in Texas, or maybe you're in Idaho, or maybe you are in some other part of the United States or elsewhere where building permits just don't happen, don't matter. Nobody even knows what you're talking about. Good on you, sort of. Because what a building permit does is it plugs you into a system and it plugs other people into your project that will A, complicate, and B, provide some security for what you're doing in case you really don't know much about what you're undertaking, or if you are engaging with a contractor and you're just not sure if that contractor is going to dot every I, cross every T, and check every box. The trade-off is, as in so many other cases, freedom versus security. Now, right off the bat, one of the universal sort of concerns about getting a building permit is cost. I don't know what it might cost where you're at. Around here, it's pretty expensive, and the bigger the project, the more money. And so that's part of the consideration. You weigh, do I want to spend the money for something that doesn't actually contribute to the outcome of the project, or is my budget tight enough that I have to save that money? Well, there are some things that you may have not been aware of, particularly on a remodel or a renovation, that might change that calculation for you. The first of them is this. Around here, when you sell a piece of real estate, you fill out extensive disclosures. There are questions in there about what you know about the condition of your property. Do you know of any foundation problems? Are there any drainage issues? Do all of your electrical circuits work? Just a long, long list about encumbrances or liens or encroachments and all manner of things. And in Oregon, if you don't fill that out truthfully and then the buyer finds out that you either covered up or lied about something that you actually knew about, it's trouble. It's expensive trouble. And one of those line items often is, have there been additions or remodels or extensive renovations? There's a question. And the follow-up question is, was a building permit pulled? And then the last question is, was a final inspection granted and a certificate of occupancy authorized? So not getting a building permit can make a real roadblock at sales time. Closely related to that is insurability. Think of it. Insurance companies are writing insurance policies, taking liability for catastrophe on structures that they really don't know much about. The bottom line on this discussion is that a building permit and an inspection record can provide some security for the people who don't need the security but want it, and that is the lender and the insurance man. They will have some idea that what they are obligating themselves to is not a shipwreck that just hasn't quite run aground yet. Now, I have heard of instances where people have either done an electrical upgrade themselves or, their Uncle Thomas, who was an electrician back in a previous century, did the electrical work and, didn't size the breaker properly to the wire size, to the demand, or I don't know, left a loose connection somewhere and it was not inspected and nobody caught it and it started a fire and there was a catastrophic loss. And in the fire forensics, it was discovered that this particular bit of electrical work caused the fire. And then since there was no inspection, I have heard of, I don't even know if it's true. In fact, would you weigh in on this if you know something about the insurance industry? That if it can be demonstrated that electrical work was willfully or knowingly or even foolishly done in such a way that it caused a loss to an insurance company, the insurance company might decline the claim. Boy, a moment like that starts to make the cost of that building permit look relatively insignificant. Now, the first dynamic when we're making a choice about whether or not to apply for a building permit and therefore plug ourselves into an inspection regime is, do I know enough about what I'm doing that I might have confidence that I won't accidentally do something dangerous? Because when you get the building permit, you're plugging yourself into building codes. And building codes, ostensibly, not always, exist for health and safety reasons. Now, sometimes it's the health of the lender and the safety of the insurance man, but health and safety are primarily what has driven building codes. And if you are well versed in that and you're not worrying about baking something into the cake that's going to hurt you or your kids or something, all right, that makes it reasonable to move forward without a permit. Maybe. But on the other hand, if you are hiring work done and you're vulnerable and you don't really know and you don't have dependable sources of authoritative information, a building inspector can be an ally to making sure that things are not overlooked or glossed or simply neglected that years down the road could compromise somebody's health or worse, cause an accident. As a younger man, I had more libertarian instincts. As an older man, security and risk has become more real and present to me than just the urge to do what I want to do. But the reasons to not get a building permit are cost and convenience, productivity, freedom, and these things are not nothing. But you have to make an intelligent calculation. For instance, a deck. Now, your local municipality, at least around here, would like to receive the fees and be plugged into a deck building project, especially if it's over about 30 inches off the ground. If it's attached to a permitted dwelling, they would assert the right and the responsibility that you have to apply for a building permit. Okay, but you probably know how to build a deck. You probably know about rot resistance and resistance to uplift and have a good idea about allowable spans and spacing on the deck and the evenness of the set of stairs, and when you need, maybe you know all that. And so you could probably reasonably just go to work. Just go to work. That might extend to moving a sink inside the house or, adding a branch circuit if you really know electrical. But at some point, when you're starting to think about moving partitions and changing bearing conditions and adding significant square footage, yeah, you or I may know how. And there have been times when I have consciously decided, nope, I am not going to spend that money or obligate myself to that frustration, and pressed forward. And I probably will again. But if you're thinking of hiring a contractor and that contractor says, yeah, we don't need a permit for this, well, that's a bit of a red flag. If, on the other hand, he says, I could do this and I'm willing to do this without a permit, but I think you should consider getting a permit. It'll add a little bit of cost. Or if he says, look, for this reason and this reason and this reason, I think that you can dispense with a permit. But if you're more comfortable with one, let's do it. That tells you a lot about that guy's business model. And when you're entering into one of those agreements, you need to learn everything you can about that guy's business model. Now, before I wrap this up, there was a time right here when there was one particular inspector who was so unreasonable that the contractors sort of launched an assault on City Hall, or at least on the planning and the building department. And they created enough of a kerfluffle that guy's not an inspector here anymore. And everybody rejoiced. Everybody rejoiced. And right now in Douglas County, the inspectors we have are reasonable people. It's easy to feel that they are part of the team. But there are times when that's not the case because power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. And sometimes it feels like building inspectors have absolute power. So if you pull a permit, follow through, get all the finals. But if you're being treated unreasonably by someone who has more power than wisdom, push back. Now don't alienate if you can help it, because that'll end up costing you more money than the permit did, maybe. But we don't have to roll over for these people. We can let them know that we consider them part of the team. We can take their good advice. We can make them quote chapter and verse in building codes. We can run it up the chain and go to their department supervisor to say, look, is this reasonable? You can run it up the chain even further and go to a county commissioner or something, or get a letter from an attorney if you're sure you're right. But in general, those people are just doing their job. And their job is Pretty important. Sometimes it's really important, and sometimes it's not. I've mentioned it before, and I'll mention it again. But rules and policies are for the strict adherence of fools and the guidance of wise men. And that includes the decision of whether or not you need a building permit, and it includes all of the decisions about how to interact with the people that our societies have put together to help us make sure that the things we build work. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.